parents that he was born blind. I want to skip. I'm not going to. Yeah, let me read 3. Jesus answered, neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. Skip to 24. Then again they, the Jews, called the man that was blind and said unto him, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. And I just want to talk from the topic, a story worth telling. A story worth telling. Each time we do this campaign where we have to witness, a large number of people always say, I don't know what to say. I don't know really what to do. I don't know really how to witness. Everybody thinks that they have to give 10 to 12 verses and give a mini sermon, 15 mini sermon on the text, and that's not necessary. All you need to do to witness is to tell your story. That's all. That's all. It's real simple. All you got to do is just simply tell your story. All of us sitting in this room has at least one thing the Lord has done for them. I'm sure somebody got 3 or 4 things, but you at least got one thing that if you told it, somebody else would be inspired to know more about this Jesus we serve. And so that's why really what I came today, just to talk to you about a story worth telling. This man in chapter 9 of John, we've heard it preached before, but we really only talk about verses 6 and 7. But when we look at the totality of this story, if you tell the story, it'll be a blessing. And what I discovered about this as I read the entire story is that we never really tell his whole story. We only talk about Jesus spitting in the dirt and how nasty it was, and him putting it on his eyes, and he go and wash, and he could see, and then the church went up. That's all we talked about. But if you read the totality of his story, there is something in here that we could all connect with, and if we actually told our whole story, I know the whole story means you got to tell some stuff you really don't want to talk about. But if you told the whole story, it would inspire somebody who does not know to want to know this Jesus that you serve. There are 3 things in this in this passage, in this chapter here, that I want to talk to you about just for about 15 minutes. And so when we look at telling the whole story, the first thing we got to look at is what to tell. You got to know what to tell. Right here in the first verse, we read it, but we really overlooked it. Verse says that as Jesus passed by, he saw a man. Stop right there. He saw the man. If you told your story right, you would be able to tell people that when you were at your lowest point, you know he had to see you. Everybody else passed you by. A couple folks helped you by giving you a little bit to make it through the situation you was in. But he saw you. Most folk don't see you. I was reading a book, and it blew my mind because he said most people have a headphone mentality. He said if you see people on the train, you will see people with headphones on, and they are engrossed in whatever is in their headphones, and they could be sitting next to somebody that is bawling in tears, and they will pay no attention to the person next to them. Not glance at them, not really look at them. They just in their music, in their zone. And I thought about it. I said, there's a lot of people that's just in their zone. You're sitting next to people who are hurting. You're sitting next to people who are downtrodden. You work with people. You live in the house with them, but you in your zone. You and your music. you and your Jesus, and you never say a word. But the text says that Jesus saw the man. He saw a man who was hurting. And if you ever told somebody who was hurting that Jesus sees them, it would change their outlook. Because when you go through life and you're hurting, it just really feel like don't nobody see you. Ain't nobody checking for you. Don't nobody call you. Don't nobody text you. Ain't nobody liking that you post. And you crying out for help. But nobody sees you. Second thing the text says, though, in that same verse, it said the man was blind from his birth. Jesus noticed his need. We are in a position today where we can look at people hurting and not pay them any attention, not be empathetic toward what they're going through. But Jesus sees your need. Everybody in here has a need. And the unsaved people first need is a relationship. And the only thing that we have that the unsaved don't have is the benefit of the relationship. But just like he sees us and our need, he sees the unsaved in their need. And we have to learn how to see the need of people. Why do we need to see the need? Because it'll make us do what the disciples did in verse 2. He saw need, but the disciples were narrow-minded. Look at what they asked Jesus. And it shocked me because they were disciples. But they said, Master, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? It shocked me because the man clearly was born blind. What could he have done in his life as an embryo that would have caused him to be born blind? Everything he ate was what his mother ate. The only thing he did was develop in her womb. What could he have done to cause his own blindness? And then what kind of God would we serve if the punishment would rest on your child for what you did from birth? And so what this taught me was that the disciples were narrow-minded. Why did his blindness have to be attributed to a sin? Why could he not just in the womb, his sight never developed, his pupils and all of the parts that he needed to see just never developed in the womb? Why could it not just be something that at that particular time medical science could not explain? Why did it have to be because of sin? And it occurred to me that I thought it was just the time we live in now, but even back then, when stuff don't go right, we feel the need to point fingers. And so I thought about that. I said, could it be that what's really wrong with the world today is that the church is too busy trying to find fault? Because they asked who did it? They asked who did it. They didn't, and so I was confused because I said, why would they be concerned with why he was blind if he was blind from birth instead of trying to ask Jesus to heal the man? Have we become so concerned with the why that we have forgot about the need? Could it be that part of the reason why we struggle with telling our story is because we're too busy looking at the why they got there? But then I thought further. I said, but even if by some strange happening it was the man's fault, even if it was his fault that he was blind, would that disqualify him for a miracle? I mean, you and I sitting here are we nowhere near perfect, right? And so if we were nowhere near perfect, but we did something that put us in a bad state, a blind state, a down state, would that decision automatically disqualify Jesus from delivering us? And so I was confused by the disciples. I was a little disappointed in the disciples because I was trying to figure out why they were so narrow-minded. None of them stood up for the man. None of them said, Jesus, why don't you just heal this man? You did it before. You just spoke the word and you touched the eye. You can do it for him. But none of them said that. They said, Jesus, how he get here? How did he get here? So we have to be mindful as a church when we go out to minister that we don't worry about the why they're there and the how they got there, but the what they need to get out. What do they need for me to give them to Jesus? But then we got to skip to verse 6 because this is the verse that we know. We know this part. We know this part about Jesus spitting in the dirt and rubbing it on the man's eyes. And so what he shows us here is his prescription. He had a prescription. And so what he does, Jesus, is he notices the man. He spits in the dirt, and we know that's nasty. I ain't got to tell you. When I said spit in the dirt, I know about 20 of y'all thought that's nasty. And honestly, it is. But it was his prescription. And so when we minister, we got to tell folk what our prescription was. This is the part we leave out. We never tell what the prescription is. We never talk about what we had to go through to get out of where we were. This man, I'm sure, wanted to see. I'm sure he wanted to see. He had been blind since birth. He had never seen his parents' face. He had never seen the sun in the sky. Never seen the people who passed by and gave him money and had the opportunity to say thank you and look them in the eye. He never had that opportunity. I'm sure he would have loved to have just seen one person. Just one person. But he couldn't do that because of his situation. But the prescription for him to get out was spit in dirt. What do you do when the prescription is spit in dirt? You deal with it. You deal with it. This man did not run away from what Jesus was doing. He accepted the spit in the dirt. And somebody in here can attest to the fact that when you were in your situation and God gave you the prescription and he began to move and pull you out, you had to go through some spit and some dirt. But what was on the inside of you, the desire to get out of where you were, was so great, you didn't mind the spit and the dirt. But we never talk about the spit in the dirt. We just said once I was, but now I am. But the danger in that is this. When you tell the story that way, it gives the implication that a person can take the Bible, rub it 3 times, smoke comes out, and you give 3 wishes to the Lord, and you can get what you want. It does, because you didn't talk about the dirt. And when you don't talk about the dirt, people just understand, listen, all I got to do is tell them what I want. It's that simple? Oh, I got about 20 things I need to give God to get out of. But here is the thing. Here is the thing. Not only does he give him a prescription, he gives him directions. He gives him directions. Now, I know at least 75 people in here at least got one pill bottle at home. You got one pill bottle at home. On the pill bottle, you have the prescription. That's the medication. And then underneath the prescription, you got directions. Take one every 4 hours. Take one as needed. You got directions. And in order for you to deal with whatever pain or to get over whatever illness, you got to follow the directions. And so in verse number 7, Jesus gave the man directions. He said, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. That's what he told him. He said, go and wash. Now watch what the man does. Same verse, right after the parentheses, it says he went. Now he probably had some help because the man was still blind. But he went. And so we got to tell the people, not only did he give me a prescription that you probably won't like, he gave me directions that I had to follow. He gave you some directions. But see, here's the problem. We don't really like to follow directions. So the speed limit on the damn Ryan is 55. It is. It said, the sign is posted, 55. Right? Can I be honest? There are times where I have found myself about this close to 80. Don't tell nobody. Don't tell nobody. But I have found myself that close to 80 in the 55. Now, my head was on the swivel when I'm doing 80 because I want to see if they can see me doing 80. But the point is, I wasn't following the directions. Now, because of the grace of God, I got where I got, like I was supposed to get there, but I didn't follow the directions. And so when you don't follow the directions, what happens is you begin to abuse the prescription. And so we never talk about the directions we had to follow because the truth be told, sometimes we abuse the prescription because we didn't properly follow the directions. But we thank God we got delivered. But the truth be told, we ain't always follow the directions. He said, go wash. But what I'm trying to tell you is when you tell your story, make sure that you tell people there is some obedience that's got to happen if you want to get out of where you are. There are some directions you got to follow to come out of where you are. But now we know what to tell. You got to tell the whole story. Tell your neighbor, tell the whole story. Tell the whole story. Nothing but the truth. So help you God. Tell the whole story. Second thing, though, is who do I tell? Who do I tell my story? First, they not really in the text, but you got to tell the unsaved. You got to tell the unsaved. We all know at least 3 people that we know not saved. Pastor probably would have said 1, but I'm going to say 3, because I know we know at least 3. Because everybody in here got at least 400-500 Facebook friends, and at least 100 of them not saved. So you know at least 3. You know at least 3. Watch this, though. This is amazing. This blew my mind. Do you all realize that there is somebody who is unsaved waiting on you to tell your story? I'm talking about the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Not the glossed over story. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. Because the unsaved person needs to connect with the prescription and the directions. But we don't like to give the prescription and the directions. We just like to talk about the healing. And so you have to tell the unsaved person the whole story, because that's what they need to connect with. Not only are you going to tell the unsaved, but you got to tell those who are unupdated. You know, I found out this morning that was a real word. I thought I had made it up. I Googled it, and it was right there. But you got to tell those who are unupdated. Watch this. In verse number Verse number 10. The text says, no, I'm sorry, verse number 8. The text says the neighbors, those who knew him, they saw him after he could see. And they asked the question, is not this he that sat and begged? So those who are unupdated are those who knew you back when. And the reason why you got to tell your story to them is because they still living off the old version. They still operating off the old information of who you were. And so you got to tell them, yeah, it is me. That's who I was. This is who I am. But look at what he told them. Verse number 11, when they asked him, how did your eyes get open? He said, a man that's called Jesus made clay, the prescription, anointed my eyes, and said, go to the pool of Siloam, my directions, and wash. And he says, I went and I washed and I received my sight. He told the whole story. You have to tell the whole story. You got to tell the whole story. He said, that's who I had to tell the neighbors, those who are operating off an old version of me. But then he says, you got to also tell the unreasonable. The unreasonable you find around verse 13, the Pharisees saw the man. And the Pharisees were kind of like the disciples. They disappointed me because the Pharisees didn't have a problem with the man being healed. They had a problem because he got healed on the Sabbath. So I thought back to the disciples. I said, the disciples almost insinuated that the man should be disqualified from the miracle. But the Pharisees was okay with the miracle, but it didn't happen when they said it could happen. And so when you tell your story, you got to say, listen, there were folk who didn't mind me coming out, but I should have came out when they wanted me out. Have you ever thought about how long you would have been in the situation you were in if you had to wait on folk permission? If you had to wait on folks' tradition? The problem was that it was done on the Sabbath, and you weren't supposed to heal nobody. You weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath. Question, what better day than today? What better time than right now? How long should we leave a person in the situation they in before we tell our story? And how is it that we feel like we have the right? Because that's what it amounts to. How do you have the right to tell somebody how long they need to be where they are? Disappointed me because these were church folks. And this text was real hard on the church folks, but I didn't write it. I'm just talking about it. I'm just talking about it. But listen, we have to tell our story because the longer you hold it, the longer they sit. The longer the blind stay blind, the longer the downtrodden stay downtrodden. When you hold your story, you holding somebody hostage. That's how important your story is. If you don't tell it, they don't come out. That's how important it is. Lastly, though, why do I tell my story? If I skip back to verse 3, I purposely left it out. Jesus tells the disciples, neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. So we tell it because all of us in here are simply just miracle candidates. We live our life and God has done some stuff for us, but there's still a whole lot more work. We got a whole lot more low places we got to come out of. But so does the unsaved, so do the unupdated, and so do the unreasonable. But when you tell your story, the whole story, it is a blessing to all three groups of those people. And so what begins to happen is God's power is manifested in people's lives. You ain't got to preach a sermon. You ain't got to have 12 verses. You just got to tell your story. Just got to tell your story. Lastly, this. When you tell your story and people begin to look to Christ, because that's all your story does, just looks to Christ. When you read this, if you go home and you read this story, you're going to find that he did say a man called Jesus. When he got to the to the Pharisees, and he was telling them, they already knew Jesus, so he just said he. He just said he. And I'm so glad that when he addressed them, he just said he, because you know who Jesus is. Pharisees know who Jesus is. He just said he. But then the Jews, more church folk, they were so upset that the man was healed, they said the man was never blind. They denied that the man was ever blind. They saw this man sit in bed on a daily basis, and they said the man was lying. I don't know no man that would sit and beg on a daily basis when they have the ability to do it. Because this man did have a family. If you read, he had a mother and he had a father. His mother and father got called by the Jews. They came in and they said, that's our boy. And yeah, he was born blind. I don't know how he's seeing. And I'm glad that they had enough sense to say, I don't know how he's seeing. Because you do know there are folk who will try to interject themselves in your testimony. Y'all know that, right? See, we know about carjackers, but they're also testimony jackers. His mother and father wasn't there when he got healed. They didn't see Jesus spit in the dirt. They didn't lead him to the pool of Siloam. They got called in on the back end. But they had enough sense and fear to say, we don't know how it happened. But watch what they did. They didn't just say, we don't know how it happened. They said, he of age, ask him. He can tell you how it happened. He was there. And I'm so glad the Jews did what they did, because what they did is they said, whoever told the truth about what happened, whoever talked about the man Jesus, whoever gave Jesus prop, they was going to kick him out the church. That's what they told him. You read it. You read it. I promise if you read it, this is deep. And so his parents were so afraid of the church that they wouldn't say Jesus did it, but they just said, go ask him. Ain't you glad that there are people who got enough sense to just say, listen, I don't know, go ask them. If you don't want to believe his story, ain't nothing I can tell you. They was there, I wasn't. And so when we are telling our story, we do it so that God gets the glory. Notice how nobody really wanted to give God the glory. The Pharisees, they had an issue with the Sabbath day. The Jews, they denied the man was ever blind. And there are people who going to deny that you were ever in the state you in, because they just don't want to see you out. They don't want to see you out. But you got to tell the people that there were those who wanted to point the finger at me. There were those who was upset because of when it happened. Those who denied it. But the truth is, it still happened. It still happened. And so when you tell your story, your whole story, not 12 scriptures, not a mini sermon, just tell your story. The whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God. People will be directed to Christ. God will get the glory. And your job is done. Your job is done. I'm going to take my seat now. Listen, do me a favor. Just tell somebody you got a story worth telling. Now go tell it.